Sound doesn't disappear in deep water, it gets crushed. The deeper you go, the more the pressure squeezes every wave until it arrives distorted, delayed, or doesn't arrive at all, and a diver who doesn't understand pressure will always assume that silence means nothing is calling them. They'll assume the surface has gone quiet when really, the surface never stopped speaking. The water just got too heavy to carry the sound all the way down. That's what happened to you, not in the ocean, in your chest. You prayed and it felt like sending a signal into a room with no walls, no echo, no answer, just the sound of your own voice going out and never quite returning. And somewhere underneath the words you were saying, an older voice, much older than your faith, whispered the only explanation it had ever learned. If no one answers, it's because you're not worth answering. That voice isn't new, it didn't start the day you started praying. It started years earlier in a house where silence had a different name. Where a closed door, a parent who didn't turn around, a question that got no response taught your body something no child should ever have to learn alone. Quiet is dangerous. Quiet means you've been left. Quiet means whatever you needed isn't coming, and you'd better learn to brace before it doesn't come again. Nobody sat you down and explained this. Nobody warned you that a lesson learned at 4 or 7 or 11 would still be running your body decades later. Your nervous system just filed it away, the way a diver's ears learn to brace before they even reach the surface, without being told to. And now, whenever the room goes quiet, even a holy room, even a room where someone loves you completely and has never once turned away, that old bracing kicks in first, before anything else gets a chance to speak. Here's what almost nobody tells you: if you keep reading that silence as proof of rejection, you don't just feel distant from God, you start avoiding Him. Slowly, without noticing, you stop bringing Him the hard days, the honest questions, the parts of you that still ache, because some part of you has already decided the answer will be nothing, so why risk it? You start showing up to prayer the way you once showed up to a parent who might or might not respond. Guarded, quiet, already prepared for disappointment before you've even opened your mouth. And a faith that only shows up when it feels something eventually runs out of places to stand. This is where it gets interesting, because the mistake was never in your believing. It was in what your body learned to expect from quiet long before belief ever entered the room. Picture the child you were, not in some abstract way, really picture them, waiting for a sound that didn't come, a hallway with no footsteps. Learning, cell by cell, moment by moment, that attention could vanish without warning, and that the only way to survive that vanishing was to stay alert, always scanning, always bracing for the drop. That child didn't have the words for what was happening to them. They just had a body, and a body that learns to survive doesn't forget the lesson just because the danger eventually passes. That bracing has a name in the body even if you've never used it, an alarm system built to keep a small, powerless person safe in an unsafe place. It did its job. It kept you watching. It kept you ready. But an alarm built for a dangerous house doesn't know how to turn off just because you walked into a safe one. It keeps ringing at the same signal, silence, no matter who's actually in the room with you now. It doesn't check the calendar, it doesn't know you grew up, it only knows the one rule it was trained on. So when God doesn't answer instantly, that alarm doesn't pause to ask whether this is actually danger. It can't. It only knows that quiet before meant abandonment, so quiet now must mean the same thing. Your mind might know better, your mind might even recite the truth back to you, that God is faithful, that He hears, that silence isn't absence. But your body doesn't care what your mind knows. The body keeps its own records and it trusts them more than any sermon. And this is the part that changes everything if you let it sink in the way it's meant to. The sensitivity that's wrecking your prayer life right now is the exact same sensitivity that once kept you alive. It's not weakness, it's not a lack of faith, it's not evidence that you love God less than the people around you who seem to feel Him so easily. It's a nervous system that learned its job too well in a place that needed it and never got the memo that the water changed. You are not broken, you are just still bracing for a depth you're no longer in. But here's where it gets harder before it gets clear. Healing this isn't as simple as deciding to feel differently. Divers who come up too fast from real depth get sick, badly. The pressure that built up slowly has to release slowly, or it does more damage on the way up than the depth ever did. The same is true here. Forcing yourself to suddenly feel close to God, white-knuckling your way into trust, skipping every stop on the way up because you're tired of hurting, that isn't healing. That's another kind of harm dressed up as a breakthrough. It might look like progress from the outside. Underneath, it's just a different way of not letting yourself be honest about how deep you actually are. So some days you'll do the work and the silence will still feel like rejection. You'll pray and mean it and still feel that old bracing rise up anyway. That doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean your faith is weaker than it should be. It means you're still rising, one stop at a time, through pressure that took years to build and won't dissolve in one prayer, one sermon, one good week where everything finally clicked. There will be a day, maybe not today, when the old ache tries to convince you this is permanent, that the quiet has always been this loud and always will be. That you've been down here so long you've forgotten what the surface even sounds like. That's the deepest point of the dive, the place where the light barely reaches and it's tempting to stop believing there's a surface at all. But listen carefully to what was actually true the whole time, even in the deepest, quietest part of the water. The silence was never the absence of a voice. It was only the distance sound has to travel to reach you at your depth. Somewhere, unmoved by whether you could feel it, a presence was already there, closer than the water pressing in around you, closer than the ache itself, closer than the child still bracing in that hallway. Not waiting for you to prove you deserved a response, not measuring you by how loud your faith sounded on any given day, just present, steady, unchanged by your inability to sense him. That's the piece your nervous system was never told because no one was there to tell it. God's presence was never conditional on your perception of it. A father who has already promised he won't leave doesn't start leaving the moment a child can't hear him anymore. The silence you interpreted as evidence was never evidence of anything except how deep the old water still is, not how far away he's ever actually been. And once that reframe lands, really lands, not just in your head but somewhere lower, somewhere older, somewhere closer to where the bracing lives, something shifts. You stop treating every quiet moment as a verdict on your worth. You start treating it as pressure to rise through, not proof to collect and carry. The alarm still goes off sometimes. It might go off for years, but you begin to recognize it for what it is, an old signal, not a new fact. A memory doing its job a little too well, not a message from God about how he feels about you. You are not the child in that hallway anymore, even on the days it still feels that way. And the quiet you're standing in right now was never the sound of being left. It was only ever the sound of pressure, the kind that eventually, slowly, safely brings you back to air. The harder question isn't whether the silence is real. It's whether you've ever let yourself rise slowly enough to actually survive reaching the surface.